On this episode of Force Options Training, I talked to Kenny Lott. Kenny is the lead use of force, control, and defensive tactics instructor for the Northwest region of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. Kenny's still an active cop in Washington State and is going to be presenting live at the 2025 International Use of Force Expert Conference that's going to be taking place in New Westminster, Canada on April 29th to May 1st. You can attend in person or virtual, and you can get more information at their website at uofconference.com. Once again, uofconference.com. And as always, this episode was sponsored by Wild Boar Social Club. It's a lifestyle. And we're on. Awesome. Thank you, Kenny, for joining us here this evening. And if you just want to give our listeners a little bio.
Yeah, my name is Kenny Lott. I'm with the Bellingham, Washington Police Department. I've been with Bellingham since July of 22, but I actually started my police career back in 05 down in San Jose, California. After spending about 9.5 years with the city and county there in San Jose, Santa Clara County, city of San Jose, California, my wife and I jumped up here to Washington, and I worked for from 2013 through July of 22 with the Redmond, Washington Police Department. We built a house here on the water in Birch Bay, and while I was working for Redmond, and I was commuting, which is about 105 miles one way, and that took its toll on me after a few years. So I decided to make one more jump north and landed up here in Bellingham, which was a good spot. It's a good fit for me. They've really kind of let me take off with all of my background experience. They haven't held me back. They didn't hold me to any restrictions as far as time and grade and that kind of thing. So I currently serve as the department's lead firearms instructor, which means I design and implement all firearms training from the line through SWAT. I'm also part of the training division and one of two use of force instructors for the Bellingham Police Department. My partner is also my boss, Sergeant Eric Burt. Yeah.
All right. And so you just wanted more rain, so you decided to keep.
Yeah, I tell you what, it got to where I was just away from home too much. And my daughter's now 11, asked me one day, she says, "Hey, Dad, do you think you can stop working in Redmond and move closer to home?" And I said, "Absolutely." So that's kind of how that worked out.
And I guess for those not from the West Coast or from maybe down south that aren't aware, Bellingham is actually quite close to the border.
Absolutely.
So it's probably about a 30-minute drive.
Yeah, I'd be quite honest with you. Not too far from the Justice Institute there. It's almost the same distance for me to go down into Bellingham, or the south end of Bellingham, as it would be to drive up north and, mess around up there, go eat, go hang out, go spend some time up in Canada. When my daughter was learning to swim, we actually would take her up to swimming pools in Canada. It was closer than going to Bellingham. So
that's funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
And nothing like a good exchange rate for you right now.
That's right. I tell you, I can't complain since we've been up here. It's been pretty nice on this side.
The Canadian peso is what we like to call it up
That's
here.
Right.
All right. So you are, and we talked a little bit this offline just before we came on. You have a position, or you're the Northwest Regional Representative for the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission.
Yeah, that's correct.
I just want to touch on that.
Yeah. I started working with CJTC. Well, I've been a CJTC instructor for almost as many years as I've worked in the state of Washington, but probably close to 2 years ago now, I took a spot as a regional TAC officer, and it took a little bit of time for that project to lift off, which worked out in my favor because it allowed me to work with the Advanced Training Division, because we were delayed on opening or launching the Northwest Regional Academy, which is now up and running. I had some extra time, and Rich Peterson, who's the program manager for CDT Use of Force, he kind of roped me in, was asking me questions, and got me working on a project of redevelopment with him and so many others there at the CJTC. Monica Alexander, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Criminal Justice Training Commission, had Rich redesign the program under the new laws and regulations that were set forth by the legislator here in Washington. And one of her main requests was that the program be legally defendable, and that it fall in line with the Attorney General's model use of force policy.
Mhm.
So Rich explained this to me, and it had me look over some of the curriculum that they were developing, and actually had me rewrite some of it. Um, I have a pretty rich background in curriculum development and design. Matter of fact, I have my master's degree in education that deals exactly with adult education and training development. And so Rich wrote me in and asked me if I'd help on the project. And since the Northwest Regional Academy was kind of at a standstill, I said absolutely. So we got to working together, and then it just evolved into the CDT 6240, 6241, and follow on advanced courses. And that's kind of how I got started with that project. And during that time, Rich went ahead and asked me if I'd take on the responsibility of being the state's Northwest Regional lead CDT use of force instructor. Um, and I said, absolutely, so long as it didn't interfere with my department schedule and what I had to do for them. And it's been a pretty good relationship as far as how much time I can devote in each space. And it's been a lot of fun because I got to travel quite a bit. Actually, Toby Hinton and you all there in Canada, we're going to be down there at the end of the month. But this has been a big deal for us because not only have we been able to reach out within our own United States here, within the state, and then throughout the continental, but being able to come up and speak with you all up there is going to put this at the forefront of defensive tactics training for police and law enforcement.
And when you're saying that, it's you kind of mentioned it's just more, at least that program is just more than just the actual say techniques itself. You're talking about integrating the articulation, the legal, all that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, in the past, it's been, anyone who's gone to defensive tactics schools, you go and you learn a bunch of cool techniques and wristy twisties and takedowns and so forth and so on. But the one component that was always lacking was that use of force instructor component. Someone who can get up there and explain why we do what we do and cite case law and, refer to legislation, which anyone who's been to court knows you better be zeroed in on, right? Because they will pick you apart, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing. It doesn't matter. If you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, it's going to look bad. It's going to look bad for you. It's going to look bad for your department. It's going to look bad for the profession. So what we do with CDT is we don't just make technique instructors. We make use of force instructors. And as you and I were talking before, you have to be spun up on current case law. Obviously, in the state of Washington, we follow closely the Attorney General's model use of force policy. Now, I will add the caveat that we don't, each department doesn't have to adhere 100% to that document, but at the basic training level, 100% the training is driven by it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and if you're not a part of that, if you're not following the model use of force policy per your department policy, you have to give an explanation as to why. And you're also listed among a group of departments that does not with your why. And I can tell you, Bellingham Police Department doesn't follow to the T the model use of force policy, and we explain why. But one of the things we do, the way I explain it to brand new recruits is use of force is like the game of football, right? American football. It's you have the overall broad category rule set, but as you go down the funnel, it gets more restrictive, right? So you have the basic game itself, then you have the NC2A rules, and then you have the NFL rules, and each as you go down that funnel, the restrictions get tighter, and you have to be more dialed in. So I kind of look at the department, or pardon me, the state of Washington's model use force policy as that overall broad driving document for the state. But each department, it funnels down and they get to configure it to what their needs and are going to be, right?
Yep. Well, that's the thing. Every department has a little something a little bit different that they need,
Absolutely.
statistics wise.
Well, that's yeah. That what you just said, that's the main thing, the statistics. What does the data say? Right? What's driving your training? What's driving your policy design? And if you're not looking at that, right, if you're just doing what they're doing next door or within your region and you don't have a good grasp as to why it's being done that way, well, it's going to bite you in the end. Yeah.
100%. Uh, so quick, just for my own knowledge on this one, is do all the police departments in Washington State all go through the same academy, or is it a central academy for the state, or is it different for?
So municipalities and sheriff's departments, these kind of things, yes. State police, such as our highway patrol,
Mhm.
our Washington State Patrol folks, they have their own academy, but everybody goes through the same curriculum,
Okay.
although they don't have to be at the same location. It used to be where everyone would go to Burien, Washington. But one thing we did a few years back was we launched the regional academy model. And quite honestly, this is where the redesign of police education came into play. You know, the after the George Floyd events that happened in the different cities, legislation took a look at what was being done, and they ran what was called a joint task analysis. And essentially, they were breaking down what and how was being taught at the academy. And it was redesigned through an adult learning model. Also, as the guiding document, as we stated previously, being that Attorney General's model use force policy. And they kind of reworked how it was being done. Now, the biggest difference from now to say, we'll use 10 years, an arbitrary number, is everything's being taught the same way. Typically, what you would see is you'd have a couple of different CJTC certified academies teaching, but you wouldn't necessarily get the same education. And so the idea in what's happening now with with this, after this JTA was done and this redesign was pushed out, whether it is the main hub in Burien or whether it's the regional academies throughout the state, it's the same curriculum being taught. Um, and consequently, because of that, we just recently received our IATA list, which is the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training. It's a pretty big, I don't know, I'll use the word kudos, right? A certification given to the state by IATA list. And that says that we are following all of these checkpoints that were all of the stakeholders across the board are saying this is the way it needs to be done, and this is we approve of it. Okay. And so also not just in the state, but through that national model, we were given that accreditation. And as far as I know, in the United States, that's the first fully accredited IATLS model that's been given
Hmm.
out. So that kind of it's not going to alleviate litigation, right? It's going to make it a lot easier to say, hey, listen, this is what we taught, this is why we taught, this is when we taught. And it's going to be the same here in Seattle or over in Spokane or over in the Tri-Cities in the middle of the state. Wherever you go where there's a regional academy, it's
Hmm.
going to be the same.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so, how? Just out of curiosity, for like a new member coming on through when they're going through their academy, how many hours roughly are they getting of use of force training?
Oh my gosh. I don't have those numbers with me. Man, and I just did a presentation for the for Eric Daigle's Use of Force Summit out in Connecticut a few months ago, and I gave those numbers out. But what I can tell you is it's about a 52-week academy if I'm not messing up my numbers, but they're doing use of force defensive tactics training. Again, those are integrated 2 hours every day. The only time we're not doing that is there's a week of EVOC, emergency vehicle operations. and then during assessment and testing, right? Which is just a couple of days throughout each academy. We break it down. They get a kind of like a midterm assessment, and then they get a final assessment. Um, but what I'll say is with CDT specifically, which is the use of force and defensive tactics, control and defensive tactics is what CDT means.
Yep.
They're seeing they're seeing three blocks of the same instruction throughout the academy. So they'll get a mass of the basic curriculum, and then they'll get they'll see it again in the middle, and then they'll see it again towards the end. And we're constantly rolling it into the other aspects of the training that they're receiving from, through patrol procedures and so forth.
Hmm.
Used to be where it was kind of siloed. They would see a certain, we're gonna work with batons on this, and then they'll be tested at the very end on something that they learned at the beginning of the academy, and then they have issues pulling it up or recalling it, right, or injecting it where it needed to be. With the new curriculum and the new model that we're pushing out that information through, they're constantly getting it all year round. It's in adult education and training, they call that an interleaving model, right?
Hmm.
Where we're mixing it throughout the academy with other things that they're learning. And this is going to make recall and actually conceptual, use a lot easier for the students.
Yeah. Not the you do baton day, and at the end there's like, hey, you're gonna do a scenario. We're not gonna tell you what it is, but we just did baton all day.
That's
Yeah.
right. Stomp three times.
That's right. Awesome. Um, so after, I mean, you kind of mentioned with George Floyd and that you guys well, at least in Seattle, they had a summer of love, as it
Mhm.
was described. How did that, the fallout from that, how did that affect in terms of?
Well, I can tell you from a personal perspective, it wasn't the summer of love.
Mm,
It may have been touted as such, but
Chaz, for those that aren't
yeah,
aware of that.
it was incredible. I was with Redmond during that time, and this is not an embellishment, but our SWAT team was stood up for 5 days straight. We're sleeping in shifts. Obviously, I was away from home. I was all the way down south, 2.5 hours away from home. But the SWAT team I was with, North Sound Metro SWAT, we were stood up for about a week, just ready to respond anywhere in King County or Snohomish County that of the 10 cities that we covered needed us. From that, there came a lot of, well, I'll refer back to the JTA. So Monica Alexander, in the wake, was told, "Hey, we got to come up with a program that falls in line with not only the best the best trends in law enforcement, but that falls in line with the proper case law, right? And as well as the Attorney General's model use force policy. And one of the big items that popped up was deliberate indifference. It's one thing. It's one thing to say that I wasn't taught something, right? But you can't just rely on that. If you know that you're missing something, if you know that you're missing, that something's not there in the training, one of the big case studies, or pardon me, case law examples that came out of the JTA was the 1989 Canton v. Ohio case that talked about deliberate indifference, and that's a failure to train, right? Your officers, your department, your members, and but that doesn't just fall on the department, right? That falls on you as the individual officer as well. Sometimes, and if you're going to carry a badge and a badge and a gun for a living, where you have the ability to take away someone's freedoms, at the drop of a dime, you better be spun up on what you can do and why you would do that. So just kind of settling on your laurels about, well, I wasn't taught that, I wasn't trained that way. That's where you started to see these libel cases popping up. So going back to the original question, Monica Alexander, and I'll use CDT, pulled Rich aside and said, "Hey, listen, I need you to look at this program, see where the deficiencies lay, right? See where we need to inject these new policies, procedures, and legislation, and then come up with a legally defensible program." And that's what Rich did with the help of myself, Tony Anderman, a handful of other people, George Hassan, so Tom Burns. I mean, the list goes on. But he took these industry experts. He said, "Look, this is what we have, right? The JTA, which to just to kind of clear that up a little bit, the Joint Task Analysis looked at where the deficiencies lie, but it also spoke with departments throughout the state, and they looked specifically at supervisors and 1 through 5 year officers, and they asked these people, what do you wish you knew coming out of the academy? Went to the new recruits or the newer officers, and then they asked these supervisors, what do you wish your folks had coming into your organization from the academy? And they compared that with what was being taught. Again, they looked at the new legislation. Is that falling in line? Um, and as you can imagine, this was a huge lift. It took a couple of years, but finally these programs started ramping up and rolling out. Ours, CDT, was just one of those patrol procedures. There were other things going on. I mean, it's easy to teach someone how to shoot a gun, right?
Yep.
It's not so easy to teach someone, when, where, and why they should be shooting that gun, right? So those were the things we were looking at.
Interesting. And when you say in terms of, did you find it? I know. Let's just isolate it to the control or the defensive tactics portion of it. Did you find it was like a complete overhaul, or was it more just some tweaking here and there, adding in some of the articulation, adding in some of the legal reasons?
That was probably the biggest part, was adding the articulation and the legal reasons why. It's never been a problem to teach someone how to do something. You know what I mean? These techniques that are being taught aren't new. They're just new to us, right? And they're new to the person coming. The biggest, the biggest thing, well, here's a great example. I came into the state in 2013, almost out of the gate. I was a defensive tactics instructor for Redmond. On multiple occasions, through multiple project managers, or I'll say defensive tactics, folks managing the defensive tactics program, we had asked for curriculum. Said, yeah, we're getting these recruits coming back from the academy. We're not quite sure exactly if they're doing what they were taught because we don't recognize some of this. Can we see the curriculum? And then we got crickets. Well, as you start to litigate those things, right, you need those training records. Again, that falls into case law. And one of the big problems was there were no training records, there were no lesson plans, there was nothing to give us so that we could keep it in our files so that we could help come court time. So that was one of the big things we did with CDT was, as a matter of fact, and you'll see this when we're down, we have a QR code that will give you everything our
Mm.
program is, down to the Washington, to the WAC, which is a legal code in Washington, the revised code, which is the penal code of Washington. It'll give you the page and citation of the Attorney General's model use of force policy that each particular technique falls under. It gives you lesson plans. It frames those lesson plans. It builds context. There's a roll sheet for every single day of the academy. And it says on that roll sheet, this is what was taught today. If anything wasn't taught within that, no problem. Maybe we had a slower class, maybe had a more advanced class, but you just make notations there. And you also show who was not in class that day. There have been a couple of high profile cases here in the last couple of years. There was a case out of Tacoma, and one of the major issues was with the training records, right? So that's one of the things we attempted to solve with CDT was we have it in triplicate. Not only is it being pushed out through the state to every academy as to what they will teach that day, but you can QR code. You can hit the QR code with your phone and it will take you to our CDT essentially website that gives you all of that information. And it gives you still photos, it gives you vignettes. If you forget how to teach a specific technique, there's a little video that goes along with it with every lesson for the day. So you don't have to make it up yourself or do your best guess based off your own training experience. You can QR code, show up 20 minutes early with your cadre and say, hey guys, gals, this is what we're going over today. Oh, you don't remember it? No problem. Let's hit this QR, watch a little video. Oh yeah, I remember that.
That's huge. And that like that's excellent. When I previous to working for a city, I worked for a federal government organization, and my last couple of years there, I was a use of force instructor. And because when you're dealing with they're responsible for training, the follow up training for people all across Canada. So when I did the instructor course, I walked out with a huge, back then, it was years ago, I won't say how long, but we had a big binder, and it was similar to that, where all the techniques broken down, uh, you know, teaching tips. Now they've went down to even like when to ask a question, which I don't think that might be a little too much. But the idea, when I got to my department, we had a bit of an oral culture there before. So I'm sure if I looked hard enough on some old napkins, I might have found the lesson plans. So I just front loaded and broke down each technique and just wrote it up.
Well, here's the thing with CDT too, and I've been through those same kind of courses. I've got binders that my wife is like, this is from 2010. Do we still need this? Um, One of the things we do with CDT is one of my jobs being the Northwest Regional lead for the program for the state means that quarterly I get together on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting with the other advisors from around the state, the other designated regional lead instructors, and we discuss what's going on, what's best practice, has there been any change in the law, what are we seeing in our regions from the data that says, this is more high frequency than this, so we need to focus here. One of the things that sets this program apart is it's a living document. I've been a part of, and I've learned and gone to instructor schools where this is it. This is what you guys are going to do. Here's your binder. With CDT, and I can tell you this because I've experienced it personally. I was on the road for almost 2 years with Rich and this training cadre that we built, spreading the gospel, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 weeks ago, I was down in Burien with colleague, maybe of yours, Peter, and we were teaching a basic course that was slightly different than the basic course we taught a year and 8 months ago. And that's because of this living document, this isn't one person or two or three people's creation. This is a group effort. And so if things need to be amended, things need to be changed, we do that. But we also make sure that information gets dispersed throughout the state to the people that need it. So that binder that you have may not look the same in 3 months. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's why this
Yeah.
this QR code, which it's a the name escapes me right now, but it is a interactive study guide. ISG is what they call these, an interactive study guide. That's what this thing is, right? Because it's subject to change, and it will. When I was down there 2 weeks ago, there were a couple of nuances that I wasn't familiar with, and I had just taught the course a month and a half prior. But in these pre-instructor or these pre-instructor meetings that we would have 20, 30 minutes before we actually roll out whatever segment we're teaching, we'll get together and say, hey guys, you remember this? This is what's going to be the next segment. Are there any changes? Are there any adaptations? So forth and so on. And so you won't have to play guess, right? The guessing game. And those videos and those vignettes, pardon me, those still photos, those are constantly updated at the Burien campus too, because that's
Nice.
essentially the hub.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I know I'm working on we're slowly putting together a video library as well. A little different for us because, we have a provincial academy, but then when they come back to us, after they go through the academy, they go any kind of in-service training. We still try to keep our core technique the same, similar to what they teach at the academy anyways. But so we've kind of identified certain core techniques that we teach. We also train, we have special constables as well. So we do all that, use of force training in-house. So just to have a video library, again, for them to reference, to look back. You can pull up a parade if you have a question or you want to break down video and, hey, this is what we teach and this is how you can just refresh yourself. Because we always say, what's the big argument? We never have enough time for training.
100%. I mean, I don't look at any periodical related to law enforcement, right? And look at any presidential study, whatever it is. And always, always one of the key points that they talk about is training time. But one of the problems is they don't differentiate what that means and they don't mandate it, right? So this is another thing that Rich has really gone on a crusade to do. He gets in front of legislators and politicians all the time. It's part of his job, but he's really rallying for mandated training for use of force and physical training and defensive tactics, if you will. As it stands now, you are mandated to train a certain number of hours per year as a law enforcement agency, but they don't necessarily designate what that looks like. You have to have X number, so much use of force training, but that could be, let's talk about de-escalation, butts in chairs, listening to someone speak in front of the classroom, which is the kind of training I hate.
Yep.
That also includes wristy twisty stuff. So to give you a good example, next week or Friday rather, we do what's called an FRD. That's our mandatory training here in Bellingham, and there'll be a 2-hour segment of DT. There's going to be a 2-hour segment of CIT. There's going to be a 2-hour segment of the organization that gosh dang it, I forget the acronym, but essentially where they would come in because there's child protection services. There's an acronym for that, but that all counts under a certain flag for training. Well, there was a little bit of DT mixed in there. There was a little bit of escalation mixed in there. You know what I'm saying? A little bit of CIT. Some days maybe there's a couple hours of patrol procedures. You're not getting a solid, say, 16 hours of defensive tactics training.
No,
You know what I mean?
nowhere close.
They're just and that's not dogging out any training department. Certainly I understand this. It's one of my main jobs right now is making sure our folks get what they need, but there is no solid guidance in that respect. And so that's one of the things Rich is trying to do is to get legislation to pass a mandatory 20 hours of defensive tactics training a year, which you and I know is a drop in the bucket. Right? I think the average in the state of Washington is 4 hours, and some folks haven't even received the last time they received any DT training is when they left the academy, and now they're working the road and they're in our class after 2 years and haven't done any DT. It's like, are you kidding me? What's going on?
And then they always complain people get injured during training. Well, it's because they haven't done anything for the last 2 years.
Well, sure. And what does the public
Yeah.
expect? They expect high-speed trained law enforcement
Yes.
professionals, right? And you can't bag on the public for that.
No.
They just don't have the information.
Cool. I guess one thing I was curious after your summer of love there, vascular neck restraint, is that something you guys teach or is that outlawed in the state or how does that work?
No, we can't use it here in the state of Washington. And it's funny, Peter just sent me, or maybe it was Toby, somebody from up north just sent me another article. I've read research papers in the past that talk about the validity, if you will, of that technique using a VNR, LVNR, some people refer to it as. But what's the big problem with it? Training time, improper application. You know what I mean? I'm a black belt in judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've choked and been choked, I'm 52 since I was 18, 17 years old. My wife might argue with me, but I'd say it didn't wreck any brain cells. You know what I'm saying? The point is I've trained it extensively. And so that's the key, right? Is you can't just, show them, expose them to a little bit of it, and then expect them to be able to apply it perfectly. And then again, there's some people that maybe shouldn't, it's like anything else in life, human error. Some people that's not an appropriate tool to use.
Yeah.
And so the short answer is no, we don't use it here in Washington. It's actually outlawed per state law and policy. Do we train it? Well, I would argue that if you train choke defense, you train LVNR, right? And so this is kind of one of those things. I'm not, when I say this out loud, sometimes I think to myself, maybe I shouldn't say that, but you find ways to get things done. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
I'm not going to teach choke defense and put on some shoddy, rear naked choke or something on one of my officers, whether they're brand new in the academy or they're 20-year veterans. Um, so you are getting some exposure to it. Hopefully someday down the road we get it. We have access to it again. But but if you look at the law, whether it's constitutional law or state law or however it works in Canada, there's no clear-cut answers. There's a couple of different provisions within our legal system here in Washington. One says you absolutely will not use LVNR, right, or VNR. And then there's another section that's fairly close to that one that says, when it comes to life or death, you can use anything at your disposal. But who wants to be the guinea pig, right? So is it easier to pick up a rock and defend myself, or is it easier to put a VNR on someone? I mean, I don't know, right? And the law doesn't help. The law doesn't help as far as clarity is concerned. So
Yeah, it's a tough. I mean, we still in our province we can still use it. There are some provinces in Canada that you can't,
yeah,
but or at least they don't train it anymore, and they don't. So it's something that they don't. It's kind of taboo. But again, it's a tough one.
it is.
We
It
gotta
sure is.
we kind of for that even just again is it always necessary, and so we've kind of adapted to uh, when we do a takedown is kind of throwing somebody in a seatbelt first, and then
Sure.
making that call, and then if and set it up so that if they do decide to keep trying to pull arms off and stuff, then you just transition to a VNR from there.
Yeah, absolutely. But even a seatbelt, right, or side control or
Yep.
whatever technique you're using to control another human being, it's all a moot point unless you train it.
Yep. 100%.
Period. Yep.
You know, it's kind of easier to train somebody to hug somebody's back uh, than actually throw on a VNR. But it's a good technique. I've used it several times myself, and it's unfortunate where it's kind of going. I guess the last thing here is we'll cover off is you mentioned a little bit is you're going to be making an in-person appearance for this one at the
Yes, sir.
Use of Force conference.
Absolutely. Yeah, I forget where. Oh, actually, I don't. Scott Brown, Sergeant Scott Brown of Vancouver Police Department, is a friend of mine. He trains up here at the Renzo Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Linden, Washington. That's where I met Scott. And I had been interested. Like I said, judo was my main love, if you will, when I was younger. I spent some time at the Olympic Training Center at San Jose State University, trying to prepare for the '04 games, which I didn't make the team, but that's a different story. But I was asking Scott because I know he worked up in Canada about this Vancouver Police Judo program because I'd heard some good things about it. It had been around for years, and he's actually the guy who connected me with Toby Hinton. And so after speaking with Toby and talking about Odd Squad and of course I start doing my own fact checking and watching videos and learning myself, right? Educating myself about your program up there. I got really excited and Toby said, "Hey, why don't you come up to our use of force our use of force summit or conference?" I think I had spoken with him. I'd been out to Eric Daigle's a couple of times. I actually spoke at Eric Daigle's conference last year about the CDT program. And after attending last year's conference at the Justice Institute, Toby said, "Hey, why don't you and Rich come up here and talk about the CDT program?" Because he seemed impressed with it, at least how we had laid it out and made it accessible for everyone. And it was no longer a mystery as to what was going on and why and how. And so that's what led us to accepting and saying, absolutely, we'd love to do it. I mentioned at the beginning of this program, my boss here in Bellingham, Sergeant Eric Burt, he and I are the use force instructors for Bellingham PD. and Eric actually attended that first conference last year via Zoom, or you guys had it online. So I was there in Canada, and Eric is at his desk. But no, we're excited about it. We're looking forward to it. As I said before, one of the things too that we didn't talk about, but guys and gals that teach DT, for some reason they act like it's G14 classified information. I mean, they don't want to give out information. It's theirs. They're real tight-lipped about it. And we are quite the opposite. Matter of fact, our presentation that we're going to be giving has a QR code to the entire program. And we're telling people, take it, use it, take what you like, make it your own. We don't care, right? Again, it's not new information. It's only
Yep.
new to us, meaning human beings. Um, so that's kind of one of the things we're excited to do. When I was out in Connecticut for the Daigle conference, I did the same thing. I ended my presentation with the QR code, and I actually got hit up by a couple of organizations throughout the country. Denver PD was interested in the program, and I told them, hey, if you need help, give us a holler. Otherwise, take it and just take out Washington State Criminal Justice and put it in Denver Police Department. I don't care. I mean, use it. If you like the outline, if you like the way it's laid out, then by all means have at it. What we're trying to do is make this profession safe for all the men and women who are inside of it, right? And I'll even add, we're trying to make it safer for the people that we're applying law to. Our job, one of our biggest jobs, is to not only enforce law, but as soon as we take your freedom away, it's our responsibility, right? Your safety is our responsibility. And so we can't just teach people how to take people down and hurt them and do this or that, right? It kind of reminds me of some of the old cheesy martial arts movies where it says, first you must learn how to heal before you learn how to hurt, right? But it's very true, right? Because at some point we're responsible for that person.
With duty of
So
care. Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's huge right now. So
No, it would be amazing if, in a perfect world, if we had all the resources and the hours that the public actually thinks we do.
yeah. But I tell you what, and my wife, she's a civilian, she's a research scientist uh, for the Veterans Administration. So, but she told me one day, and it stuck with me. She said, and this was years ago, she said, probably it's as much your fault, meaning the law enforcement profession's fault, as anyone else's, for not getting, we've been so tight-lipped. Like I said earlier, they hang on to the information like it's theirs and they can't let that get out, right? G14 classified. We need to do a better job, and I think we are doing a lot better job of educating the public about what we do. Um, you know, I'll keep circling back to CDT, but one of the things that Rich has done is he's gone out and he's got in front of civilian, oversight groups. He's got in front of legislators, and he's explained what we're doing, but more importantly, why we're doing it. And some of these people, I kid you not, one of the responses he got in one of these meetings was he said it was almost offensive, but he understood it. And someone said, "Oh, they were shocked." They said, "Well, you're not trying to hurt anyone. You're trying to help them." And Rich was shocked by that, but
Yes.
that just goes to show you that that person had no idea. And
No.
whose fault is that?
Yeah. No,
You know?
I agree. I also, and even just for members, I always tell them now, especially in articulation, is get away from the robotic kind of talking. At the end of the day, especially in Canada, like the trier of your fact is going to be a civilian. It's not
Yeah.
us. So if you're articulating, you can throw in words, but do it like you're gone home and you're talking to your significant other, or go explain to your mom or your grandma why you're on the news and what you're doing. And if you can explain
Yeah.
it to them that it makes sense, and
When I talk to new cops or even veteran cops about, articulation, report writing, where use of force is concerned, we always say, you'll be judged by a jury of your peers. Well, they're not your peers. You will not be judged by a jury of your peers. You're going to be judged by a jury of people that don't understand what you do you know, for a living, right? Not in detail anyway. The information they get comes from movies and TV shows and hearsay, right? Or the media, the internet, which is, I don't know where you fall on that, but it's like a double-edged sword. There's good, but there's also bad.
Yeah.
So
No. Awesome. Uh, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, or if they wanted to get in touch with your Q or find out your QR code, other than the
yeah,
Use of
absolutely.
Force conference you're going to be appearing at April
Yeah,
29th to May 1st, I had to throw the plug
yeah,
in there. Uh, what's a way they can get a hold of you?
yeah. They can shoot me an email to my department email, and that's going to be KELOTT at cob.org. That's KELOTT at City of Bellingham, cob.org.
Awesome. Well, Kenny,
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Uh,
Absolutely. Thanks for giving me a buzz, and I like doing these podcasts. They're a lot of fun.
awesome.